As a part of the Maia, Gandalf, first known as Olorin, was an immortal spirit in visible physical form. He dwelt in Lorien, but learned pity and patience from Nienna, the Lady of Pity and Mourning. This meant that he had the same order as the Valar, but to a lesser degree. As a Maia, he would be a servant and helper of the Valar. The elves don't know how many of them there were, but they were seldom visible in form to elves and men. Gandalf will later be known as Mithrandir, the Grey Pilgrim among the Council of the Wise. When the first shadows were felt in Mirkwood, there were the Istari, whom men called the Wizards. Mithrandir was the most vigilant, and he doubted the darkness of Mirkwood. Out of Radagast, Curinir, and himself, Mithrandir was closest in council with Elrond and the elves. Curinir was Saruman the White. Gandalf had feared the first shadow of Sauron returning and went to Dol Guldur. There was finally some peace for a while. However, the shadow returned and power increased for a second time. By then, the Council of the Wise had occurred, consisting of Mithrandir and Curinir, along with Galadriel, Círdan, and Elrond and other lords of the Eldar. Additionally, Saruman had started learning about the Rings of Power and the history. As the shadow grew, the hearts of Elrond and Mithrandir had darkened. They realized that Sauron himself had taken shape again, and was growing and trying to gather all the rings to his hand. Gandalf figured that with more power he could master the enemy. The wise were troubled, but none were as perceived by Saruman the White, who went against the swift deeds to master Sauron suggested by Gandalf. By then, Curinir had turned to dark thoughts and became a traitor. He did not want anyone finding the Great Ring and started envying Sauron and wanting the ring. Mithrandir spoke to the council after a while, saying, "It is not needed that the ring should be found, for while it abides on earth and is not unmade, still the power that it holds will live, and Sauron will grow and have hope. The might of the elves and the elf-friends is less now than of old. Soon he will be too strong for you, even without the great ring, for he rules the 9, and of the 7 he has recovered 3. We must strike." Curinir assented, desiring Sauron to be thrust from Dol Guldur. He aided the council for the last time, and Dol Guldur was assailed. But it was too late, and Sauron had seen it. After Gandalf first learned of the ring, Sauron was dismayed, and in the last battle consisting of himself, as well as the sons of Elrond, the king of Rohan, and the lords of Gondor, and the heir of Isildur, with the Dunedain of the north, they had looked upon death and defeat, and Sauron was too strong. Sauron had believed that the ring was destroyed by the elves, but continued seeking it after he found out it was indeed not destroyed, and the ring was taken from him, as the strength of the elves to resist him was greater before, but not all men were estranged from them. Gil-galad, Elven King, and Elendil of Westernessy overthrew Sauron eventually, during which they had perished, for the men of Westernessy came to their aid. It was later lost and fell into the great river, Anduin, and banished after Isildur marched north along the east banks of the river. Isildur was killed when the orcs saw him, and the ring slipped from his finger as he swam one day. However, the Perianath, or the hobbits, were able to bring them deliverance. "I was very troubled at that time," said Gandalf, "for Saruman was hindering all my plans. As Sauron arose and declared himself, and Gandalf didn't know what to do, nor did he expect him there. Gandalf had some dark thoughts, and he was away from the Shire for over 20 years. By then, Sauron had arisen again and was close to declaring himself. Gandalf saw fit and need to attack Lorien and Rivendell at first. He urged the council to see that Rivendell was not out of Sauron's reach by then. Gandalf came to believe that Bilbo was ideal for a task that he had at hand. Before then, he met Thorin by chance in Bree, and they went to Thorin's halls. There, they discovered a shared desire to remove Smaug. Thorin had actually asked for Gandalf's advice, so they went to the Blue Mountains. Thorin was mainly focused on brooding of his wrongs and the loss of the treasure of his forefathers, and burdened too with the duty of revenge upon Smaug that he had inherited, for dwarves take such duties very seriously. And that was also when Gandalf had the idea of taking Thorin and his company of dwarves, along with Bilbo and especially him, to travel to the Lonely Mountain. Gandalf had been attracted by Bilbo during his childhood as a young hobbit. Bilbo had stayed in Gandalf's mind ever since, with his eagerness and his bright eyes and his love of tales, and his questions about the wide world outside the Shire, having heard news of him and saw that he was talking to dwarves. Gandalf had tried to visit Bilbo many times, but he was often off, probably visiting the dwarves. However, he went back to Thorin in order to persuade him to let Bilbo come along with him. For Bilbo had changed, of course. At least, he was getting rather greedy and fat, and his old desires had dwindled down to a sort of private dream. Meanwhile, it was a map and key that would save the situation and get into Erebor, which was used to help Thror and Thrain escape, according to Thorin. Thorin was suspicious at the time, deeming Bilbo soft as the mud of the Shire and silly. Gandalf insisted that if Bilbo goes with you, you will succeed. If not, you will fail. After many frustrations and concerns from Thorin, Gandalf eventually went through with his own foresight and later decided to go to the Shire to visit Bilbo in 2941 of the Third Age. Gandalf showed up when Bilbo was celebrating his 71st birthday and advised him to give up the ring and to give it to Frodo, which Bilbo eventually did. By then, Bilbo had already had the ring for 60 years. Gandalf joined the Fellowship as Gandalf the Grey in order to manage the beings of Middle-earth, and later would become Gandalf the White to research the technology of the enemy and become the leader. He had borne the ring Narya. Because of this, he has seen further and deeper than any other in Middle-earth. However, it was not known that Gandalf would bear the Ring of Fire until he had arrived at the Grey Havens.